The note was tucked under the dog's water bowl. A folded piece of paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook, with 3 lines written in a hand that had pressed too hard on the pen the way people press too hard when they are concentrating on keeping the letters even. The bowl was behind the east pylon of the Clearwater Bridge, set back in the shallow depression where the concrete met the embankment, with a half-eaten bag of kibble and a worn flannel blanket folded into a square beside it. The dog was a yellow Labrador mix, middle-aged, with the patient, anchored look of an animal that had been in one place for a while and had decided to stay until something changed. The note said, "His name is Chester. He likes the kibble by the red barn. Please feed him. I won't be back. Thank you." That was all. Jackson read it 3 times. He read it the way he read intelligence in the field, looking for the operative fact, the thing beneath the surface of the words that told you what was actually happening. The operative fact was not the dog's name. The operative fact was not the kibble. It was the bridge. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with us until the very end, because what Jackson did next, and what it cost him, is something we believe you need to hear today. Staff Sergeant Jackson Drake, USMC retired, had been running the river trail below the Clearwater Bridge at 6:15 in the morning, because running was one of the 3 things left from his service life that still worked the way they were supposed to. And he had been holding on to them with the quiet desperation of a man who understands that structure is not comfort, but it is the thing that holds the space where comfort might eventually return. He was 38 years old and lean and rangy in the way of long-distance runners, with dark hair gone over long and a jaw that had 3 days of growth on it, and eyes that were a deep, tired brown. Not broken eyes, not empty, but the eyes of a man who was carrying more than the recommended weight, and was doing it alone, which was the particular error that men like him were most prone to, and least likely to recognize in themselves. He had a scar across the bridge of his nose from a vehicle rollover in Helmand in 2017 that had healed faintly pink, and that in certain lights was almost invisible, and in others was the first thing people saw. He had served for 12 years with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 2 deployments to Helmand and 1 to Iraq, and had come home from the last one 18 months ago with an honorable discharge, a combat action ribbon, and the realization, arriving slowly over the 18 months since, that he had been good at the work in a way he had not yet found anything in civilian life to match, and that this mismatch between what he had been capable of and what was currently being asked of him was not a temporary adjustment but a longer reckoning that he had not yet found the right tools for. He did not talk about this. He did not have a name for it that felt accurate, and he was resistant to the names other people offered, because the names other people offered were for conditions he associated with breaking, and he had not broken. He was still standing, still running the trails, still showing up to the county parks work, still calling his sister in Missoula on alternate Sundays. The structure held. What had changed was the thing inside the structure, the quality of the days, the way the mornings arrived without much in them besides the obligation to fill them, the fact that he had stopped expecting anything particular from the hours ahead, and had told himself this was maturity, and suspected it was something else. He was in Dillon, Montana, doing seasonal trail maintenance work for the county parks department, and living in a 1-bedroom rental that had a good view of the Beaverhead Mountains if you stood in the right spot in the kitchen. And he had his health, and he had his runs, and he had the particular discipline of a man who has been trained to function in the absence of comfort, and he was applying that discipline daily to something the training had not prepared him for, which was the ordinary peacetime weight of being a person without a clear mission, in a world that did not need him in the specific way that 12 years of service had needed him. He had Rex. That was the truest sentence in his life, and he knew it, and had thought about it more than once in the specific terms of what he owed the dog in return. Rex was a 5-year-old German Shepherd, 84 pounds, with a coat of rich sable and black that caught the morning light along the river in a way that made him look, at certain angles, like something out of a painting. The kind of painting that is trying to communicate something about attention and readiness and the particular beauty of a creature built to a purpose. He had a notched left ear from a wire entanglement during a compound clearance in Helmand, healed clean but permanent, and a healed compression fracture in his right front paw from a pressure plate encounter that had cost his handler, Corporal Danny Reyes, 3 fingers on his left hand, and had cost Rex 6 weeks of recovery, and had cost them both something less visible that neither of them had fully put down since. He moved along the river trail each morning with a loose, searching attention, not anxious, not reactive, but in the continuous low state of readiness that a dog trained at that level maintained the way breathing is maintained, without deciding to. He ran ahead, circled back, checked Jackson's position against the trail and the tree line and the river, and repeated the cycle with the patient thoroughness of a system that had been designed for exactly this level of vigilance, and was applying it here, because here was where he was. Rex had been Jackson's for 14 months. He had come to Jackson through the military working dog adoption program with a file that listed his operational history and his medical clearances, and one line in the behavioral assessment that Jackson had read 3 times. Maintains handler proximity behavior at an elevated level. Recommend placement with handler experienced in high bonding work. The person who wrote that line had understood something about Rex that took Jackson approximately 4 days to confirm independently. The dog did not want space. The dog wanted to be close, not because he was needy, but because being close was what the work had always meant, and the work had not stopped simply because the deployment had. In 14 months, Rex had been the most consistent element in Jackson's life. Not a comfort animal, not a pet, but a partner in the specific sense that 2 people who have been through hard things together become partners, which is something different from friendship and something more durable than most of what civilians mean when they use either word. The river trail ran east from the Main Street trailhead along the Beaverhead for 2 miles before looping back through the cottonwoods below the Clearwater Bridge. Jackson had been running the loop for 8 months. He knew the bridge the way you know the landmarks on a route you run in the dark. Not as a thing you look at, but as a thing you pass through. He had not looked at it as anything other than a waypoint until this morning, when Rex had broken stride 40 yards before the east pylon and angled off the trail toward the embankment with a purposeful certainty that meant something was there, and it mattered. Rex was standing beside the water bowl, nose down to the note, when Jackson reached him. Chester the Labrador had backed against the pylon and was watching Rex with the wary patience of a dog evaluating a much larger dog in his territory. And Rex was conducting his assessment with the focused professional attention of a dog who had learned to distinguish between the kind of situation that required action and the kind that required stillness, and had already reached a conclusion. Jackson read the note. He looked up at the bridge deck above them. 40 feet of concrete and steel, the Clearwater River moving cold and brown beneath it in the early October current. He looked at Chester. He pulled out his phone and called 911 and gave the dispatcher the location and the language of the note and his own name and what he was looking at. And the dispatcher's voice had the particular focused calm of someone who understood immediately what the language meant and was already moving on their end. He stood at the base of the bridge and listened to the river and held the phone and looked up and waited. Because waiting at the base was what you did when someone might still be at the top. 3 minutes passed. Then 4. The October air was cold off the water, and the cottonwoods were shedding the last of their yellow leaves in a way that was beautiful and completely beside the point. A figure appeared at the bridge railing, male, young, early 30s at the outside, standing at the eastern rail, looking down at the river. Jackson did not shout. He had been trained in a different kind of operational context that the worst thing you can do in a volatile situation is announce your presence in a way that forces a decision. He moved up the embankment to the bridge access stairs with the same ground covering, unhurried stride he used when the goal was to close distance without triggering a response. Rex moved with him, close on his left, reading the direction and the pace. He came up onto the bridge deck 20 feet from the man at the railing. The man's name was Caleb. He was 31 years old, with the look of someone who had not slept in more than one night and who had, in the hours leading to this morning, moved through the particular narrowing that comes when a person has decided on a door and stopped looking for others. He was gripping the railing with both hands and looking at the water, and when Jackson's footsteps reached him, he turned his head and looked at Jackson with an expression that was not surprise exactly. It was the expression of someone who has made a decision and has been interrupted mid-sentence, and who is not sure yet whether the interruption is a reason to keep reading or to close the book. Jackson sat down on the bridge deck, not standing, not approaching, not blocking. He sat down cross-legged 4 feet from the railing with Rex beside him, and he looked at the river and he said, in the voice he used when the goal was not instruction but presence, "I found your note. Chester's okay. He's down on the bank." Caleb did not say anything. He looked at Jackson sitting on the bridge deck. He looked at Rex, who was sitting with his shoulder pressed against Jackson's knee, looking at Caleb with the steady, open attention of a dog who had learned to be present without demand. "I'm not going to tell you not to," Jackson said. "I'm going to tell you I'm going to sit here. And I'm going to ask you to tell me about Chester, because Chester is going to need someone and I want to understand what he needs." A long moment. The river below. Cottonwood leaves. Caleb said, "He likes to sleep against your legs." "Yeah?" Jackson said. "Rex too. Heavy as a bag of sand." Something in Caleb's grip on the railing changed, not released, shifted. The white-knuckle tightness eased a degree. They talked for 40 minutes. Jackson did not ask the questions a counselor would ask. He did not have that training, and he did not pretend to. He asked about Chester, how old, where Caleb had found him, how long they'd been together. He asked what Chester did when it rained. He let the conversation go where it went, which was to a job lost in August, and a marriage that had ended in May, and a brother in Nevada who thought things were fine because Caleb had told him things were fine, and the specific, grinding exhaustion of a man who had spent 6 months telling everyone things were fine, while the distance between that and what was true had grown to a size that had become its own kind of unbearable. Jackson listened. He had been trained to listen in a specific way, for the operative fact, for the thing beneath the surface of the words. And what was beneath Caleb's words was not a man who wanted to die. It was a man who had stopped being able to imagine that what was ahead of him could be different from what was behind him, and who needed the imagination of someone else to borrow until his own came back. "I've been where you are," Jackson said after a while. Not loudly, not as a speech, just as a fact, set down between them on the bridge deck in the cold morning air. Not on a bridge, but in the same room as that door. "I know what it looks like from the inside." Caleb looked at him. "It got different," Jackson said. "It didn't get fixed. It got different. That's not nothing." The sheriff's deputy arrived at the south end of the bridge at the 40-minute mark. Jackson had texted the dispatcher an update at 20 minutes. Because the situation had not required emergency intervention, it had required time, and the deputy had held at the south access and waited. When Caleb agreed to come down from the railing, Jackson stood and walked with him to the south end of the bridge, and Rex walked on Caleb's other side, close. And Caleb's hand went to the dog's back and stayed there the way hands go to dogs in moments when the hands need something to hold. At the base of the bridge, Chester was waiting. He had moved from the pylon to the bottom of the access stairs at some point in the previous 40 minutes, as if he had known the direction things were going. When Caleb came down the stairs, Chester made a sound that was not quite a bark and put his front paws on Caleb's chest, and Caleb sat down on the last step and held the dog with both arms and the deputy. A woman named Ruiz, who had the practiced composure of law enforcement combined with the eyes of someone who understood what she was looking at, said nothing and gave it the time it needed. Caleb was transported to Dillon Regional's Crisis Stabilization Unit for a 72-hour evaluation. He agreed to go. He asked Jackson, at the ambulance, what would happen to Chester, and Jackson said, "Chester's coming with me. He'll be here when you get out." Caleb nodded, and they loaded him, and the ambulance went, and Jackson stood on the road with Rex on his left and Chester sitting on his right, and the three of them watched it go. Chester stayed for 5 days, which was the 72-hour hold plus 2 days while the outpatient transition was arranged, and Chester and Rex established in those 5 days the particular tente of 2 dogs in a small space who have decided the other is tolerable and are performing their tolerance with mutual dignity. Chester slept against Jackson's legs on the couch, as advertised, with the trusting completeness of a dog who had been waiting for someone to come back and had adjusted the definition of who that person could be. Caleb was discharged on a Thursday. Jackson drove him home, a studio apartment on the south end of Dillon with a window that faced a parking lot but had a tree in it, and carried the bag of kibble up the stairs and left it by the kitchen door. Caleb's brother had driven from Nevada and was there when they arrived, standing in the kitchen with the expression of a man who had gotten a phone call 4 days earlier and was still reordering the world around what he had learned. He shook Jackson's hand for a long time without saying anything, and Jackson let him, because some things need the duration. In the months that followed, Jackson ran the river trail 3 mornings a week, and Caleb ran it with him on Saturdays, at first tentatively and then with more of himself in it, and Chester ran between them and Rex ran ahead and doubled back, and the beaverhead moved alongside them the way rivers move, without memory, without judgment, just forward. Caleb found work in November at a building supply company. He called his brother on Sundays. He was in weekly sessions with a counselor at the County Veterans and Community Behavioral Health Center in Dillon, which Jackson had driven him to the first time, and which Caleb drove himself to every week after that. Jackson had started going too. Not for the same reasons. For the reasons that had been accumulating in the background for 18 months. The mismatch, the structure without warmth, the mornings that arrived empty, and that a bridge in October had finally given a shape he could point at and hand to someone else to look at with him. The counselor's name was Terrence, a veteran himself, and on the first session Jackson had said exactly what he had said to Caleb on the bridge. "I'm not broken. I'm just carrying more than the recommended weight." And Terrence had said, "That's a good place to start." And Jackson had gone back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. There was no dramatic turn. No single morning when things resolved. The days simply acquired more texture, the way a room acquires more light when someone raises a blind incrementally. Not all at once, not a flood, but degree by degree, until you realize you have been seeing more clearly for a while without having marked the moment it began. He was going. That was the whole of it. He was going, which was not nothing. It was, in fact, the same thing he had said on the bridge, now said to himself. "I'm going to sit here. I am going to keep going." That was the whole of the answer. and it was enough. Sometimes God does not send us to the places we plan to go. He puts us on a river trail on a cold October morning and lets a dog pull us off the path to a folded piece of paper behind a bridge pylon. And what we find there is not someone else's emergency. It is the moment we were made for. The one where every hard thing we have carried finally has a use. The note said, "I won't be back. The Marine never left." That is not a coincidence. That is not an accident of timing or geography. That is providence at work in the lives of ordinary people who stayed on the path long enough for the path to need them. There are notes like that being written in the dark right now, by people who have stopped believing there is a door other than the one they're looking at. The difference between the door they choose and a different one is sometimes one person, one set of footsteps on a bridge deck, one voice that says, "I'm going to sit here." Sometimes that is all it takes. Be the person who sits. If this story moved you, if it stayed with you the way we hope it did, share it with someone who needs to know they are not as alone as they feel. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you are struggling right now, if you are in the room that Jackson knows from the inside, please reach out. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by call or text any hour of any day for anyone who needs a voice on the other side. You do not have to write a note. You can call instead. If you believe in stories of courage, compassion, and the grace that finds us in the hardest places, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you there is someone nearby who will sit on that bridge deck with you. You only have to let them find you.